How did this city spawn an empire that stretched from southern Colombia to central Chile in less than 100 years? Welcome to Cusco. Now this is a story that's full of psychedelics, gold and bravery. But first, let's talk about geography. Cusco sits at about 3,400 meters in the high Andes, which means the oxygen up here, it's thin. It's not bad when you're sitting down there drinking a coffee, but try walking up these.
Oh, you're lovely.
The valley which Cusco sits in, it's basically this big bowl with Cusco at the bottom, surrounded by mountains. And it's not a stable bowl either. It sits where the Nazca plate is getting subducted under the South American plate, meaning there's huge earthquakes here occasionally. So if you're going to build things, you got to build them to last. Now the Inca didn't just spring from the rocks, and because this area was so abundant, there were people that have been living here for thousands of years. In fact, around 10,000 years ago, the people who were living in these valleys in the Andes domesticated the potato. So you have them to thank for fries and crisps. Next on the list for domestication, let's say 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, was koi, or guinea pigs, which are delicious and are still eaten in this part of the world. Llamas, alpacas, which could survive on the highlands up here and provide meat all year round. And as the people in these valleys kept on domesticating crops and animals, they got closer and closer to being a more pastoralist and agriculturalist society, and further away from being hunter-gatherers. The Marcaval culture, which sprang in this very valley about 3,000 years ago. And these guys had pottery, they had permanent residences, and in 2014 they even discovered a Marcaval burial site in downtown Cusco, which was exciting because it showed that there were people here that long ago who maybe believed in the afterlife, because they found that the corpses were buried with obsidian, pottery, things that were maybe for the afterlife. Now, while the Marcaval were beginning to build houses and maybe small communities, they were a long way off empire. That came about 1,000 years later, when in 500 to 600 AD, the Wari people sprang up. And these guys were legends. They liked psychedelics and beer. Now, the Wari people are interesting because they showed the first signs of sort of building administrative buildings, roads, with influence that spread from the central Andes in Peru all the way out to Cusco. Like, there is evidence of Wari ceramics that were found around Cusco, so they had a wide sphere of influence. And the way that they gelled their society together, I think is great. They basically used partying, which actually reminds me, we do need to get some chicha. ¿Tiene chicha?
Yogur natural.
No chicha?
No chicha, yogurt.
Ah, okay. So chicha. Chicha is made by fermenting maize, by chewing it, historically by women chewing it and spitting it into these big vats. And if you get enough of it spat in there and the fermentation process is right, you get beer, which will actually get you pretty messed up. Now, the Wari would brew vast amounts of this stuff. So they'd have women constantly just chewing maize, spitting into buckets and making this chicha, which they would then use to party with all of the local chieftains that they had dominion over, which I think is such a great way of, bonding everyone together. The Wari would also build temples in the shape of a D, which was meant to symbolize the mountains, which showed that there was a culture here that already was beginning to see as the mountains as deities, as apus, which sort of makes sense because all the water around here comes from the mountains, and without water, obviously, there's no life. So that was built into Wari culture and tradition. And despite the fact that the Wari did build roads, they had outposts, like garrisons, administrative buildings, after 500 to 600 years, their time did come. And they faded away, and it might have been due to infighting, or maybe they just overreached their boundaries, or climate. There was a shift in climate back then, maybe there was a long drought, but something led to them passing, and their influence over this area ended around 1100 AD, which meant that there was this time of potential. With the Wari influence fading in this valley, the next people to step in were the Kilka, who locked down the valley that Cusco's in. And they began to really get going when it came to terracing, stonework, ceramics, irrigation. They began to sort of master the skills which the Inca would eventually make their name on. because these were the direct predecessors to the Inca. Now, the legend goes that Manco Capac emerged from Lake Titicaca with his sister slash wife with an order from Inti, the sun god, to civilize the world. And he came to Cusco with a golden staff which was sank into the soil here, which declared Cusco as the sacred ground which the Inca would spring from. Now that didn't mean that the Inca Empire became the Inca Empire with him. It didn't. They were still just one small little chieftain group amongst many, just fighting for survival here. Now life at that point, say from the 1200s onwards to the 1400s, was just a game of survival for the Incas, like all of the rival tribes around here. There was warring, there was sparring, there were alliances made, there was marrying, basically just fighting for survival, just a few thousand people in the valley making sure that they didn't get wiped out by anyone else. Then in 1438 AD, everything changes with Kusi Yupanqui, which means the fortunate prince. Hello. Do you want to hear the story of Kusi Yupanqui? Okay, if I must. Well, my little friend, our story starts with the invaders called the Chanca. So, Kusi Yupanqui's father runs away. His name was Viracocha Inca. So he runs away, but Kusi Yupanqui stays, and he manages to rally a small group of the warriors to stay and fight the Chanca. Now, the story goes that... Where's that music coming from? Oh, one of these little shops. Lovely. Anyway, the story goes that Kusi Yupanqui, in the midst of the battle, he sees this vision. He sees this golden object from Inti, from the gods, appear in front of him, and he asks for help. And Inti transforms the rocks into Inca warriors, which help him to overthrow the Chanca and eventually chop off the leader's head. Now, this assault changes the mindset of everything. And the Inca, this is what spawns the Incan Empire. That one moment of being invaded, feeling existential threat, and then switching it around and conquering everyone. Kusi decides that it's time to rebrand himself as Pachacuti, which means one who overturns space and time. Now at this point, Pachacuti is in an absolute flow state. He is vibing. He feels like the god is in him. So he makes some bold decisions. He comes up with a name for his kingdom called Tawantisuyu, which means the four regions united, emanating from Cusco. He redesigns the shape of Cusco into the shape of a crouching puma with Sacsayhuaman as the head and the two rivers that come together at the bottom over there as its tail. He also builds a temple to Inti, the sun god, at the center of everything, and makes that as the state religion. Inti becomes all-powerful, and he, as the descendant from the sun god, Inti, becomes the divine rightful ruler of the Inca. That experience with the Chanca must have settled something with it in his mind. If you're not conquering, then you are vulnerable to be conquered. He went down south to Bolivia. He went east in towards the Amazon, where he could trade for things like coca leaves and amazing parrot feathers. Then he went north all the way up to Ecuador and the bottom of Colombia, conquering the people as he went and establishing the Incas in a very quick time frame as the dominant empire in the region, all from this one tiny little valley. And this didn't take place over his generations of like 5 or 6 or 8 generations over centuries. It took 2 generations to add 4,000 kilometers of the Inca Empire. Him and his son, all the way down to central Chile, all the way up to southern Colombia. Crazy. Now it was done a lot with the military, a lot by marrying, and by something called mitmac, which was the moving of his loyal people into newly conquered people to try and quell rebellions. And now we're going to go to the most interesting, no thank you, now we're going to go to the most interesting point of it all, which was the place where he placed the Sun Temple. We're in the Plaza de Armas, which means we're about to almost definitely have people trying to sell us stuff, but I also think that there is a lady who sells chicha here. So before we go to the Temple of the Sun, let's go and try and get some of this Peruvian beer. Boom. That is Our Lady. Hola, ¿tiene chicha?
2.50.
Sí, uno, por favor. Muchas gracias, señora. Chicha. Wow, she's a busy lady. It's good. Now, I don't think that this is the alcoholic stuff, and I also don't think that they still make it from spitting it anymore, but this is chicha. You can taste the fermentation. And it's delicious. This is the Plaza de Armas we're walking through right now. And one of the sadder facts is, although we're right now talking about the beginning of the Inca Empire, this is where it was pretty conclusively ended by the Spanish, when they chopped off Tupac, I think it was Tupac Inca's head here, and he was the last Inca ruler. And when that sword came down, that was the end of the civilization. And it happened right here, Plaza de Armas. But anyway, that's not for right now. We're off to the Temple of the Sun. Ashlar masonry, that was the word. The finely cut stonework that Pachacuti began to implement and that the Incas perfected from the Quilca. So the Quilca, they were good, but then the Inca were masters. And I guess the real genius of Pachacuti wasn't just his ability to spread his land so far, it was also to glue it together well. So the 4 regions that he'd split the empire into the kingdom, he gave each to 4 governors. So, you know, he delegated. Ooh, is this it? So obviously the Spanish have built their church on top of what was the Temple of the Sun. But this for me is where it starts getting scary, the level of genius of Pachacuti. Because he covered the Temple of the Sun in gold. He made Inti the #1 deity of the Incas. And then there were these lines that emanated out from the temple. And it was just this genius method of further gluing your empire together, because he took the cosmos and he managed to bring it down to earth. Like, a lot of the lines were correlated with the summer solstice, or they would help to instruct about when the best time to harvest was. Like, it wasn't just random lines, they were connected to the realities of what the Incas were seeing around them in terms of space, seasons, crops, and that was the genius. It was about bringing something which seemed celestial, like deities, seemed cosmic, and bringing it down to practical usage using the secas emanating from the center of the empire, the Sun Temple. It was all connected to this. And so I've been going to quite a few of them, and I think that I've actually visited a few of the sites around Cusco without realizing that they were on these radial lines, on these spokes of the sun god. But it's amazing to stand at the center of what was the biggest empire the Americas had ever seen, stretching 4,000 kilometers from Colombia all the way down to central Chile. And this right here behind me is the center of it all. Wow, how different history would have been if they just give them a bit more time, maybe to discover gunpowder or something. Maybe they could have defended themselves. But yeah, fascinating. And that's how the Inca civilization spawned, from this valley, the valley that we are in now in Cusco. Bye!